Let's sit in a comfortable meditation posture and close the eyes. Put our attention on the silence that's there, always deep in the mind, beyond the mind. Become that silence. You are the silent witness. The silent witness is the eternal now. There is no dialogue. There are no thoughts. Listen to Yoga Vasishta from the silent witness. Book 4, Chapter 33. Continuing with 46. He who knows his inner self is beyond the external world, and who neither desires nor dislikes anything in this world, and who preserves the serenity of his temper at all times, is not susceptible of egoism. Whoever thinks himself to be the inner ideal distinct from outward phenomena and keeps the calm equanimity of his mind is not ruffled by the feeling of his egoism. Whoever knows himself to be the silent witness, distinct from outward phenomena, is never ruffled by the feeling of his egoism. Brahma said, "Tell me, sage, what is the form of ego? Does it exist in the body or mind or both? Is it eliminated when the body dies?" Vasishta replied, "In this triple world, there are three sorts of egoism. Two are of superior nature, but the third is of a vile kind and is to be abandoned by all. The first is the supreme and undivided ego that is diffused throughout the world. This is the supreme soul, Paramatma, besides which there is nothing in nature. The feeling of this kind of egoism leads to the liberation of men, as in the state of living liberated. The next form of self-consciousness is the knowledge of ego as distinct and apart from all, and as minute as the 100th part of a hair. This ego is good also. This second form of ego leads to the liberation of human souls, even in the state known as living liberation. The last and worst kind of ego is identified with the body and all its parts. This ego takes the body to be the soul or self. This third and last kind is the popular belief of mankind, who take their bodies as parts of themselves. It is the basest form of ego and must be forsaken in the same manner as we shun our inveterate enemies. The man debased by this kind of ego can never come to his right sense. Under the thrall of this powerful enemy, a man remains subject to all the evils of life. Possessed with this wrong notion of himself, every man is constantly troubled by various desires of his mind, and these expose him to all the evils of life. Let's look at these verses carefully. The three kinds of ego. The Supreme Soul, Paramatma. This is the silent witness. The silent witness is consciousness. There is this sense of, this is who I am. I am this. And this sense of I amness, I am the silent witness, is a form of ego. The second form of ego is the thought in the mind, the conscious thinking mind, that I am consciousness. It is a self-consciousness. Now, this form of ego knows itself to be distinct and apart from all other beings. This is often called the jiva. The jiva is like a bubble in consciousness, made out of consciousness, but it has its own self-imposed wall around it. This wall is formed initially by simply the idea that I am a separate being. This idea that I'm a separate being forms a bubble in pure consciousness. And that bubble is the jiva. That is the start of our adventure in being lost in the illusion of the world. And that bubble of consciousness we call the jiva must one day be surrendered back to the wholeness of pure consciousness. When we experience ourselves as the silent witness, then we clearly see the jiva walled in by its own individual karmic traces and striving to balance those karmic traces and come out of the bondage that it put itself into. So this is a good form of ego. It is the ability to think a thought. It is the form of ego that arises when someone achieves level of consciousness 200. Before level of consciousness 200, this form of ego literally does not exist. Before level of consciousness 200, and this represents 85% of the world's population today. Everyone is identified with the body. This is why the world is so easily controlled by fear. Fear of death of the body, or harm, or pain, or suffering of the body. So when someone says there's a mysterious, invisible thing in the air, and it will kill you, %85 of the world who believe this become afraid. And in their fear, they lose all their rationality. They lose no way of reasoning for themselves. They are totally dependent now on this outside influence that says there's something that will kill you and it's in the air and you must protect yourself from it. This kind of ego is the worst kind. Verse 57. By means of the better senses of ego, men transform themselves into gods, but the common form of ego debases a man to the state of a beast and its attendant evils. That I am not the body is the certainty arrived at by the great God and the great and good, who, believing themselves to be of the first two kinds of ego, are superior to the vulgar. Belief in the first two kinds raises men above the common level, but the ego of lower kind brings every misery on mankind. It was owing to their baser sense of ego that the demons, Dhamma, Vyala, and others were reduced to that deplorable state, as was related in their story. Rama said, "Sage, describe to me the state of a man who has discarded the third or popular kind of ego from his mind. The man who attains the well-being of his soul in both the present and future worlds." Shishta replied, "Having cast off his poisonous ego, level of consciousness 200, the man rests in the Supreme Spirit in the same manner as the believers of the two other sorts of ego. This delineation point in the levels of consciousness at level 200 occurs when the individual begins some form of meditation. Those below level 200 have no interest in meditation, have no interest in anything but the preservation and beautification of their physical body. They see their physical body as the only thing that is alive. And they totally identify with it. But at level 200, the question arises in the mind, am I more than the body? And as soon as that question arises, one wants to investigate and find the answer. And then meditation comes in. This introspection of meditation leads immediately to the silent witness. Verse 63, the first two views of ego place the egoist in the ego of divine unity. But all these views of ego in reality are only different forms of dualism. When lost in unity, all consciousness of distinct personality is absorbed in the Supreme One. Good understanding should always strive to its utmost to get rid of its common and gross sense of ego, identity with the body, in order to feel in itself the indescribable joy of unity, the greatest good that one can attain for his highest state of joy is to renounce the unholy belief in one's separate personality in this material body. The man who gives up his identity as a personal ego in this body is not debased or lost, either by his indifference to or by his management of worldly affairs. The man who has rid his mind of ego by reducing his selfishness is indifferent to pain and pleasure, just as the satisfied are to the taste of sweet or sour. The man detesting the pleasure of life has his full bliss presented before himself. The mind is cleared of its doubts, and darkness has nothing hidden from its sight. By investigation into the nature of the ego, which is the process of meditation, and forsaking his gross selfishness, which is the process of transcending, the man crosses over the ocean of the world of his own accord. The man has nothing of his own. Who knows himself has nothing. And yet who has all and thinks himself as all in all. And who, though possessed of wealth and properties, has the generosity of his soul to disown them to himself. He is truly situated in the Supreme Soul and finds his rest in the state of supreme bliss. Now, as we continue, established in the silent witness, let us begin the process of Trimanasanya, the most powerful way to balance individual karmic traces. And balance all the karmic traces that have been enlivened by today's reading. Jai Gurudev.